Roger Vasquez is Director of Ad Ops at Quench, the personalization everywhere company that leads the industry in AI-driven omni-channel personalization and dynamic ad serving. Now, we also have Kevin Dunn, who's the Vice President of Identity at LiveRamp, the leading data enablement platform for the safe, easy, and effective use of data. Roger, I believe you're up first, so it's all yours.
Thanks, Chris. That's my cue. So here are the topics that we will cover today. And at the end, everyone will get on to their next meeting, but then you'll bring with you an understanding of DCO data, how it will benefit you as an advertiser, even beyond just, campaign performance. And you'll also learn what you need to know to get started. So let me suggest that the ultimate goal as an advertiser is to build a relationship with your customer. And to do that, you need to be able to find and engage with those customers, connect with them. But that's getting increasingly difficult and hard to do. You can blame it on the cookie, but there's a lot more at play, like the new and emerging channels and fragmentation and complex or complicated workflows. And while technology and teams are cropping up to solve for these niche and growing challenges, they still tend to operate in silos. And these players and platforms hold so much value, but they aren't all that helpful if they can't form strong partnerships amongst each other, right? So what makes that strong partnership then? We think reliability. A core component of what makes DCO data derived from dynamic creative optimization. A core component of what makes that DCO data effective and actionable is that it's founded on reliable identifiers. And reliable identifiers enable tech partners and platforms to really speak the same language. So we can understand each other, so we can facilitate these easy and efficient processes, and so we can form strong and lasting partnerships. And reliable IDs aren't just how partners can communicate, they're also the basis for insights. When data points and signals, like those derived from DCO, can be stored and then enriched over time against that persistent and reliable identifier, then that's where we really learn the most about our consumer. It's how advertisers can learn to adjust the story over time and understand what resonates with the consumer. So I feel like I've been talking a little bit already, but if it isn't obvious, reliable data is incredibly important, and it also just happens to be a core component of Clinch, but also of LiveRamp.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. And as you sort of said, that having that reliable identifier is key to using all sorts of different types of data, including DCO data. And when we think about sort of a reliable identifier, right, we think about one that's actually based on an individual, that's collected from an authenticated event, that's built upon a static offline understanding of that consumer, that's tied to this identity, that's then, to your point, interoperable across the ecosystem, right? So partners can collaborate, so data can be shared, and so brands can use all of this data to run effective campaigns, to present rich and robust dynamic content, but also so that over time, they can really deeply understand and build a profile of this person. And so this reliable identity tied to what we sort of see as a very rich and futuristic data set in DCO, because DCO data is relevant, it's timely, and it's contextual about those individuals. It really further builds out this identifier to not only be used by brands in their DCO world, but also in their other channels, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, the core there, I think, is like this DCO data piece. And that's, I think, what we'll jump into next, right? And so we all know that DCO is a powerful technology that drives performance. It's dynamic creative optimization, not dynamic creative benchmark, But DCO also captures the most interesting parts of the consumer's journey, like maybe how consumers respond to messaging based on their local time of day, or maybe based on their last site visit, or maybe both. DCO combines all these data points and signals, and we provide a wealth of robust data. From just one DCO ad serve event, like within a product carousel, maybe, we'll know the product that was clicked on, obviously, but we'll also know the products that weren't, and the copy and image variants that were in the ad, but also the signals that led to selecting those components. DCO data is this wide and robust data set. But when a partner like Clinch provides this wide, robust data set, an advertiser will want to stitch it together to form these additional connections. And, Kevin, Clinch's partnership with LiveRamp is a great use case of this. I'm sure you'd know a lot better than I, but I wonder, what are some interesting examples of the data sets an advertiser could connect?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this earlier, and we have a really interesting retail media partner that's been doing a lot of testing of content and collecting of interesting data sets. And what they found as a very powerful use case is to understand their consumer across different business units. So one business unit has a very sort of understanding of this consumer and how they want to approach them and the things that consumer is buying. And on the other side of the business, they're doing different testing and different understanding of that consumer. Well, imagine the power when they can use robust data and reliable identities to connect those two worlds together and cross-sell and upsell across those two different divisions that didn't have any sort of understanding before. And then if you look at the types of data they're getting to do that, it's obviously, interesting transaction data. They're adding lifestyle data of what people might be doing, whether it's exercise or whether it's health traits or whether it's things they might be consuming. And then on the other side with the dynamic creative data, they're adding all sorts of rich behavioral, contextual, real-time insights about what those people are doing. And now both sides of the business can sort of look at that and say well, if this consumer is very interested in these groceries, they're probably really interested in these relevant pharmaceutical products, right? So when that person's in the store or on the website, they can now present dynamic content that plays to both sides of that consumer's wants and needs.
I think that brings us over
sort of the different data sets, right? We're circling around sort of two different types of data here since the beginning of this conversation, right? One data set that we're all very, very familiar with, DMP data, right? In a sense, static, very demographical sense data, data that, doesn't necessarily update over time, but is very reliable and used to create very rich understandings of our consumers. But on the other side, it's this DCO data, which is much more robust and, like I said, relevant, contextual, and in almost, I want to say real time, but insightful of what that consumer is thinking in that time if you're doing sort of dynamic content A/B testing. And you need both, right? To get this rich profile of the customer, to understand them both width-wise and depth-wise, and to have this, all of our dreams of a 360 view of a consumer. We always talk about that. The closest that I think you can get is you really combining both sets of these data. And not only to use this data and this profile in your dynamic content, but take all the rich data you're collecting from doing dynamic content and using that to create audiences, segments, lookalike models into other channels, right? And that's how you take the power of DCO data and not only use it within your platform like Quench, but in all the other platforms that you're engaging your customer on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you mentioned something about the dream there, and I don't know, I hope you get it. That's exactly what we're looking for too. We want to definitely grow our data tables very wide with this robust data. But what we want to say is within DCO, we're also testing and learning as we go, right? And that's exactly it. Both this headline, of course, but also being able to test and learn with DCO in real time in timely manners. DCO enables us to measure, who is engaging, how they're engaging, and what they're engaging with throughout the life of the campaign. And then again, you mentioned, the persistent identifier. And when we have a persistent identifier and we can share that ID space and speak the same language, like with the ramp ID, we can test and iterate on the experiences a profile will see over time. So when we start to think about these creative experiences over time, creative becomes, as you kind of were suggesting, like a data source. Like this DCO data is now a source that can help your campaigns, that this enriches the data sets. So every impression becomes a small experiment. Those experiments feed the machine. They not only make the algorithms smarter, but they make the advertisers smarter, and not just about campaign performance, right? But about the audiences. And that's what consumer insights are. Yeah. What Clinch brings as a DCO partner is this robust data set, all the data points from the ad serve events, growing out this wide data table. But then, as you were kind of saying, like over time, we're going to grow that data set very deep now, and we can take a look at this in action.
Yeah. One thing I'll just sort of add to that last point is, some of our most successful advertisers in the brand space are always looking for, unique data sets to sort of stand out against other people who are going after the same consumers. And one of the interesting things I think here that DCO data brings is rich, unique first-party data to the table that allows brands to build out that profile with data that they have collected, that they have engaged with their customer about, and gives them that competitive edge that I think many brands are looking for, of how to uniquely engage with that consumer in a way that they're not doing today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've been thinking about that a lot too, in that I always thought an ad banner is just a really mini website experience, yeah. And here we are as the provider of this first party data back into, close the loop internally with Clinch, DCO optimization. But as we'll see, this data can come out and we can share it on, right? Yeah. So every impression is the collection of all of these and more data points. And again, the key is that the event's always tied back to this persistent and cookieless identifier. And in our ad server, we tie everything to Clinch ID, but the Clinch ID plays nicely and speaks the same language as LiveRamp ramp ID. And this is how we can amplify DCO data, right?
Yeah.
So I think DCO data is amplified by the connections.
Yeah, it's interesting too to think about the ramp ID and the Clinch ID as mutually augmenting each other, right? So like the Clinch ID brings a bunch of interesting profile data. The ramp ID not only gives you the ability to bring all sorts of other data into that profile from a rich ecosystem of partners, but also allows you to interact with your understanding of that consumer based on the Clinch ID with the entire ecosystem of publishers, TV providers, DSPs, wherever you want to go and engage that person. So the interoperability here of our two IDs is hugely beneficial because it brings, again, that, all the static data and other rich dynamic data we have from our partner ecosystem tied to your ramp ID and your other first-party data, including offline data, tied to this really relevant, real-time, contextual data set from the Clinch world. And now it's all tied to this really unique profile. And if it's inside of the Clinch ID, you can think of the ramp ID as augmenting that Clinch ID. But then on the other side, when you want to send it out, the Clinch ID is augmenting the ramp ID as it sends out. So it's just this great bi-directional relationship.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I think about is like, I think an easy one to think about rather is like offline sales data. And so, did this profile make a purchase in the store? That's great. But that data connection should now augment the live creative messaging. Maybe now we should show loyalty-based messaging, right, to the consumer rather than just a remarketing or like a conquesting messaging. That's pretty cool. Like that's what we want to do. Yeah, I know that we were just discussing some more applications. Any other like applications of an enriched ramp ID, or what do we do with it? Where does it go?
Like there's a ROAS here, right? Where you can even do simple suppression campaigns, right? Like to your point, don't target people who've already been in the store and converted, right? But also the effectiveness of the dynamic campaign. Did it actually bring a in-store transaction if that's your outcome that you're looking for, right? And so, that can go the other way too. And that's where the interoperability of the Ramp ID can come in, to your point of tying offline transactions to this digital interaction. And we see, a lot of brands doing that in siloed channels. I think this sort of combination, to the point you made earlier of like every ad is a mini website, I think it really gives you that ability to turn that impression or that experience to that consumer to a really relevant one. But then I think the key is tying it to some sort of transaction. And I think the one that everyone always wants to understand is that this digital impression lead to in-store. And particularly as, we're trying to, or many brands are trying to get people back into the stores. This is a huge opportunity for them to understand how to best spend those dollars to drive that foot traffic.
That's it. I know we're circling around these like kind of R terms. My name's Roger here. We're talking about reliability. We're talking about recency, but I think we can kind of boil it down to, let me try to recap, I guess. Reliable identifiers are the key here, right? And with reliable identifiers and then rich, robust data sets and good partnerships, consumer data, just these data points can all be put together, brought together, and we can learn over time, and they can become consumer insights. And this stuff isn't make-believe, right?
Yeah, no, I was going to just say, like, we work with a lot of clients, and we work with a lot of different types of companies, brands, agencies, technology companies, publishers, other sort of platforms. We're seeing this happen today, and we're seeing companies and brands who are using this type of data take off, right? The use of it taking off, the results of using it taking off. And it's real today. We have use cases today where clients are doing this already, which makes this partnership so much more exciting for us, right? Because, bringing that value to our brand clients is huge for us.
Yeah, exactly. Like, spoiler alert, we are doing this today with one of the nation's largest grocery retailers. Say enough. But the advertiser here in this use case that we're doing today, again, between Clinch and LiveRamp, is they're taking their online and offline audiences and they're onboarding to LiveRamp, right? And then in LiveRamp, audiences can be segmented, syndicated to their DSPs. Those DSP now segments are targeting media campaigns, and with Clinch as the DCO ad server, we can show the best creative for that audience and profile with all these layered, data insights. Like with this advertiser, we're showing enriched product recommendations based on interest, activity, and their real-time geolocation. And normally that's where DCO tends to stop. It's a performance driver, but we can close the loop. We do close the loop. We send these rich data points right back into LiveRamp, tied to a Ramp ID. And this feedback loop refuels the process. Advertiser audiences now can be enriched and segmented further based on this real-time creative response data. It's DCO data. And then further segmentation can happen. This can inform media buying, like prioritizing or suppressing audiences, but it also enriches the next chance we have at creative decisioning. It's scalable, it's actionable, it lasts over time, and I think it actually gets better over time, I guess I'd say.
It certainly does, right? Because if you have that reliable identifier and you're building out this rich profile, you can understand, Kevin and Roger's lifetime interaction with you. Like, Kevin likes Twinkies, Roger likes apples. Like, you can really start to make sure that you're not only presenting the right content, but I really liked what you just brought up was the right products, right? Like the things that Kevin's buying. And by using your ID on the front end and ours sort of also to enrich, you can bring in life events, right? Like there's probably certain times of the year that I really want a Twinkie versus an apple, right? And I think that's super important, right? To know when Kevin's interested in A or when he's interested in B, right? And doing those experiments, storing that within the profile over time, and really being able to then optimize that over the long haul.
I love that you totally get it, because I too love Twinkies and I too love an apple, and I got to pick times of the year where I'm going for one or the other.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would just be crazy to think that these ads could be just slightly more tailored to start picking up on these smaller signals, and then maybe the healthier choices triggers some other kind of marketing about healthy lifestyle, or maybe the kind of comfort food can trigger some messaging about like comforting difficult, moments, that kind of stuff. This cycle can just grow and grow and grow, and we can refine. And again, we're doing it today, and it's pretty cool.
I mean, I'm excited that it's now out there talking about it. I'm excited for brands to take advantage of it, and excited to hear the success stories.
Same. I can't wait to work with more and more customers. So what's next? If anyone on the call wants to learn more about DCO Data and how Clinch and LiveRamp are working together to make sure people see Twinkies or apples, you can email me. You can email at info@clinch.co. But as we wrap up, and before you all head off to your next meeting, I see that we've got quite a few questions that have come in. So I think, Chris, back to you.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Roger, and Kevin as well. Well, indeed, we're now ready to open the floor to your questions. So as a reminder to participate in our Q&A, just type your question into the Ask a Question text area and then click the send button. We've already got several excellent questions. We could always use more, though, so keep them coming. Gentlemen, one of our attendees asks about DCO data and what it's based on, if anything, outside of click-through rates and site visits, the sort of digitally tracked conversions. You mentioned in-store purchases. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that and how this, what you might call analog behavior, matches up with the digital behavior via your DCO platform. Who would like to take? Roger, you want to take that one first?
I think there's probably a little bit of both in here. Okay. I think it sounds like what are like the methods or technologies of bringing the offline data online? And then also, once we have audience segments online, how are we decisioning and finding the right creative messaging? And from the Clinch side, I think we can talk about maybe us being a differentiator in the DCO space. And first and foremost, like, I really, truly, sincerely believe that our technology is just significantly different. We have this really unique tech stack, AI decisioning that's far superior to others in the space. And our ability to set these complex decisioning logic rules, plus visualize this data in real time, is a total game changer. The offline to online kind of data set stuff, I think that's maybe speaking a little bit more towards identity and bringing data from offline real first party users into the digital space.
So the way that sort of LiveRamp is able to do that, obviously, is with the core technology within our identity graph, right? And having this rich understanding of US consumers and all of these offline attributes that we have about them, and then this rich network through our authenticated traffic solution that allows us to connect digital identifiers across web, mobile, TV to those offline identifiers, which creates this powerful RAMP ID. And because our identity is based both on this rich offline data set and this very, very rich online data set, and we've connected the identifiers, anonymized it, we can now connect offline transactional data where you might have a name of postal or a phone number or some sort of identifier that we can connect to your online identifiers, which are more and more becoming RAMP ID based. And that's how we connect these offline transactions to the online world, and the other way around. But the other thing too I heard in the question, Roger, was like, there's a bunch of interesting, I think, DOC data that's being collected through Clinch that you probably aren't used to collecting, right? Beyond just like that the person clicked, being able to attribute the product that was in that ad, being able to understand the location that ad was being seen, understanding all these other rich and robust things you talk about beyond just like, hey, I saw the ad, right? There's all sorts of other things that the Clinch ID collects. which I think really aligns to the way we think about identity, which is more than just a few identifiers. It's all the rich information that is used to understand that profile.
Yeah, it sounds good. You know, one of our attendees also has an interesting question about the whole dynamic component of your discussion. Obviously, that's the key, right? Dynamic creative optimization. Our attendee asks if he were to use Quench to serve his original video asset versions without necessarily having a dynamic component involved, would he be able to benefit from the value of this engagement data in some way or other? Perhaps not to its ultimate extent with the dynamic component, but to what extent would he be able to benefit without the dynamic component? Roger,
Yep,
you want to take
that one sounds like me. Yeah. And, you know, like Kevin was just saying, like from the Clinch DCO ad server side, we see this robust and rich data set of the little components in the ad that might have been clicked or not clicked, or the parts that were hovered, or the carousel movements. And those all kind of suggest that maybe that ad is like a living, breathing, dynamic, real-time ad. But it doesn't have to be, right? The quick answer here to the question is yes. The non-dynamic ads that an advertiser might bring in, like a pre-made MP4 video that they're repurposing from broadcast, or some HTML5 banners that their designers had made over summer. Now they need to bring it into the next, you know, partnership with Clinch. Yes, because Clinch is still an ad server at its core. We're still serving the creative. And even though it might not contain those dynamic elements, we're still able to report, log, and learn from all those like really robust engagement pieces in like the targeting side, the time of day side, the geography side. All these different signals come into the Clinch ad server, and we can share them back out to LiveRamp, and then the advertisers can learn and grow real fast.
It sounds good. You know, Roger, let me follow up again with you. I think you had mentioned that Quench has as one of its clients a major grocery store chain. Did I hear that correct, or did my ears deceive me on that one?
That is correct.
All right. Well, you know, that piqued one of our attendees' curiosity here. You have clients who are currently activating DCO data. Do you feel at liberty to tell us a little bit more about which advertisers you're doing this with and what are some of their results?
Well, under some NDAs, I can't name names right now. But however, the top advertising verticals beyond just those grocery retailers are also like auto and CPG and insurance. And the results definitely vary client by client based on how they're applying and using these insights. And you know, like I mentioned earlier, I think one of the most powerful effects we've seen is when the DCO creative learnings are applied both at the media targeting and strategy level, like prioritizing, suppressing audiences, further segmenting audiences. But then when it comes back down through Clinch on the next impression, the next pass, we've learned so much about the profile and the segments that we can kind of fine tune the creative messaging. That's like the most impactful campaigns we run today.
Got it. Kevin, would you like to add to that? I'm curious about these verticals and which industries benefit most from this. I would also love your opinion about B2B marketing as well as B2C. Any thoughts there on other verticals and even B2B?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously serve some of the similar verticals. I would add that, you know, we see a lot of success also in financial services outside of just insurance, where we have a lot of successful clients using dynamic content. And I do think there's a huge applicability in B2B. And we have, you know, clients who use this for sort of account-based marketing approaches. As you could probably obviously see the value in being able to understand those buyer personas just as well, and providing, you know, content based on title, based on role, based on, you know, jobs to be done. And so I think, you know, just as much as there's a B2C application here, the B2B world benefits just as much.
Got it. You know, one of our attendees also was curious about some of the technology behind this, and in particular, the refresh rate. Roger, I know that you had mentioned dynamic depends on behaviorability in real time. Our attendee asks, is the refresh every 30 minutes, 5 minutes? What does real time mean in this context?
Yeah, that's great. So there's I guess there's kind of two branches here. One is how quickly is Clinch learning, and then how quickly can Clinch share those learnings out to LiveRamp, and they're both essentially still real time. So immediately within the Clinch ad server, because we are storing everything to this persistent identifier, Clinch ID, we're able to learn immediately on the next impression. Did they click on product carousel slot 1? What kind of product was that? Let's recommend some more products like that next time around. That's immediate. And then how can we share and pass this data to LiveRamp? Well, that's also based on a process we have built out over a long period of time, where we can share those insights directly back to LiveRamp, tied to the ramp ID on that impression, pulling in all the DSP signals like impression ID, auction ID, all that stuff back into LiveRamp. At LiveRamp, if those audiences are already set up to be syndicated to the DSP, then that's also a real-time connection. So as fast as those refresh rates are set at the advertiser side and LiveRamp to the DSP side, that data can pump right back through. We've seen a lot of effectiveness, like once or twice a day, on sharing data back around and back to the DSP, but it could be done faster than that too.
Kevin, you want to add to that? That's
I was just thinking in my head, it's like great for the retargeting use case, right? Like
right.
Almost like the rechanneling use case. I like to think about it, right? Like, the content was served on ESPN.com, and now because of the profile, Kevin spends a lot of time on Facebook. That's an obvious one, obviously, but then going and retargeting him there, I think, because of that fastness of the connection and the profile and the integration that we've built out, like that can happen as fast as it needs to, I guess, is the concept that I would say. Like real time to me is as fast as you need it to happen for the consumer to get to the conversion.
Got it. I know this isn't necessarily a commercial for Clinch, but why not? One of our attendees asked, is the Clinch ID unique to Clinch? What type of data info is it comprised of, and is it yours and yours alone, or other assets as well?
Yeah.
Roger?
Thanks for the airtime, right? Yes, the Clinch ID is proprietary to Clinch. And, since we're the only stakeholder, we're the ad server, so we understand what's happening in the campaign, and we're privileged to know all those elements that are in the, winning creative, which ones resonated with the consumer enough to inspire or drive action, as well as like the specific steps that kind of led up to the action taken. So, and we're able to input those anonymized values, right, into really rich data sets, and can tell the advertisers like nearly a complete story of what's happening with their audience. And then again, earlier on, that Clinch ID augments, sits on top, plays nicely right with the ramp ID, which enables all these data connections, and then again brings it back to what we were just talking about, like kind of that full circle picture of the consumer.
This is where the partnership thing is very powerful, right? Because the Clinch ID is very unique and very powerful within the Clinch platform, and then LiveRamp brings that interoperability of that identity and all the things that are powerful about the Clinch identity to the rest of the places where you might want to use that.
Got it. You know what? We've talked a bit about verticals. We've talked a bit about types of brands. One of our attendees asked specifically about agencies, and of course that subsumes brands as well. But specifically about agencies, how our attendee asks, how are agencies using this data to modify creative, let's say, and how do brands fit into that as well? Roger, back to you again.
Sure. Yeah, I can touch on it for a moment. And I think one of the really interesting values, though, is that with this partnership between Clinch and LiveRamp, it's easy and scalable and fast. And I think as an agency, I would really like reliable, fast, good operations across all of my advertisers, all of my brands, both from the DCO learning side within that advertiser, but then knowing that the next advertiser I onboard, the next brand I onboard, I have this repeated, well proven out process that we can activate pretty much right away. Anything, Kevin, you would add, I guess?
I was thinking, like, if I was at an agency working on behalf of many brands, like I want to bring as much value as I can to my clients. Right? And I think using this type of data and using this type of content presentation allows me to try different things, to engage with my client in a very consultative manner. So I think there's a great opportunity around agencies, doing dynamic targeting and understanding dynamic data in a way that helps them bring lots of value to their brands. And from a brand, like I would appreciate that. Right? I appreciate that, the agency pushing me to try different things, bringing me unique insights, and helping me understand the best way to leverage dynamic content and dynamic data.
Got it. Folks, connected TV is huge. It's growing like crazy. I think we're talking double-digit increases year over year, and its growth seems almost unlimited at this point. Is DCO applicable to CTV, and in what way would you say? I mean, it's the essence of programmatic, right? I think it's a great fit. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that, Roger and Kevin.
Yeah, I can talk to the serving side. Absolutely, yes, DCO and CTV. We're already integrated with a ton of awesome CTV OTT publishers where our ad tags are already certified, ready to go, and we're serving tons of video variations there. We can augment with geolocation data, depending on where their nearest retailer is. That now CTV impression will be tailored towards that nearest location. DCO is totally applicable in CTV.
And as you say, from the LiveRamp side, CTV is a huge area for us too. It's a big part of what builds that data enablement platform, as we have sort of identity connections across most of the CTV players. So, going back to the beginning story of how we work with Clinch, right? If you wanted to use that information within Clinch beyond sort of the ad serving that you're doing within Clinch, like our identity is going to help you take that to all of your different CTV platforms, but also bring in interesting data from those platforms into building that rich profile on your reliable identity.
Got it. We've been talking about real-time behavioral analysis, real-time responses, near real-time responses. It's all very quick. It's all very alarmingly quick in a way. But one of our attendees, and I notice he's from a financial services company, so this is kind of interesting too. Is DCO more of a technical tool? How do you get from the real-time rapid response concept and shifting A/B tests, et cetera, endlessly? What are the more corporate strategic levels that DCO can be used for as people sit back and say, well, what does all this mean now? And what next for our next strategic effort? Roger?
Yeah, I think we're, if I understand where the question is coming from, I think it's kind of taking not only those like really like micro, great, this is so technically cool and interesting, like really, really low data points that we can drive A, B, C, and performance differences, but it's also maybe stepping back to see like, did this DCO campaign move the needle? Within Clinch as a DCO ad server, we're able to, on the one hand, test complete experiences against baseline conversion, baseline creatives. So we can always put out a control or a kind of like, non-test group that might be a 5-10% size audience against the DCO strategy. And again, all those same DCO learnings can be enriched and sent to LiveRamp back up into DSP targeting layers, and then to move and affect the campaign later. So as you step back and understand, like, did this DCO campaign work? We can simultaneously run a clean, controlled baseline group to actually measure performance lift. Is that kind of the way the question was kind of aiming?
Yeah, I think so.
I want to make sure I get that right.
Yeah. Well, I have one more question to ask you, and we'll wrap it up. This has been a great discussion, I think. Where's the future leading? Obviously, you've made a lot of inroads into DCO, and it looks extremely promising even today. more than promising. Where are we heading? What's the future look like the next 3 to 5 years? Where are we going to be there in terms of Clinch and LiveRamp?
I can start from the LiveRamp side. I think sort of just the future of, to your point, DCO data and its growth is just leveraging it for more and more use cases and putting it not only in your sort of workflow or your analytics environment or wherever you're housing your profiles, not just for targeting and segmenting, but for measurement and then retargeting, right? And so really making it sort of like a core part of how you're building out that consumer profile, and then probably seeing more and more channels becoming dynamic, right? As you leverage dynamic data to build out your profile, well, then you're just going to want to keep, it's like you're addicted, right? You want every sort of channel to be providing you all these, contextual, relevant, timely insights. And so that's kind of where I see it going, is more channels becoming dynamic, more data being collected, and more use cases being used from that dynamic data.
Roger?
Absolutely.
Closing thoughts? Yeah.
Absolutely, channels. Yeah, Clinch, we love to position ourselves as like this agnostic omni-channel ad server. And so, yes, channels is an even more robust, wider data table of channels now, right? Digital out of home, audio, programmatic, native, like these are all these new DCO channels that we can enable. And because it's coming back to a Clinch ID onto the Clinch ad server tied to Ramp ID, again, this just facilitates an easier, faster learning cycle. And I think that's just going to grow and scale as new channels emerge. Thank
you, Roger. Well, we've reached the end of our time. Thanks to everyone for attending Ad Age's custom webcast sponsored by Clinch. Now, you can also view and listen to this presentation on demand using the same link you used to attend today. You'll receive an email as soon as the archive is ready, so you'll want to be attentive to your inbox, download it again, and share with your colleagues. And also, if we didn't get to your questions, we had a lot of great ones today. Roger and Kevin will get back to you personally to answer them, I'm sure. So on behalf of our guests today, Roger Vasquez and Kevin Dunn, thanks so much for your time. Have a great and prosperous day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.